I can't be the only person out there that had many questions about why so many of the guests in a park were unhappy when it rains for a long enough period of time. Turns out, there are significant consequences, counterintuitive mechanics, and ways to mitigate these things which you will want to know if you don't already. In the tutorials during the campaign, players are encouraged to place down a body dryer close by to swimming pools and water slides and rides. This hints at one of two ways that guests can be wet or soaked, and that's by going on attractions which give them this status. If you observe the traffic of guests actually using the body dryers from these locations, however, you'll rarely find a guest actually using it. If the weather is clear and a guest using a pool leaves and is wet or soaked, they are only afflicted with this status for a short time, meaning it will not impact their happiness and thus their willingness to stay in the park. That would be the case unless the second source of these statuses comes into play. Rain is brutal if it lasts for multiple in-game hours, and you may have experienced this yourself, especially if you got to the Paradise Lost scenario. What can you do to prevent your whole park from being unhappy? There are two ways. The first is actually the body dryer mentioned earlier. This is the best use case for the body dryer, and when it is raining, it turns this amenity from a do-nothing service into a cash machine with constant guest interest. That's right, at default, guests must pay to use body dryers and are rather happy to do so. A word of caution about these buildings though, be very careful if you include them in a scenery group, as those have some of the hardest time connecting to paths for no real good reason. Regarding the mechanics here, guests that use the body dryer can always get wet again, so let's change that. The second way to prevent guests from being unhappy as a result of getting wet is by selling umbrellas through guest services shops or, in niche cases, modular gift shops. Guest services are already very necessary for pool passes if guests don't already buy those at the park entry, and there are a few other essential items that are sold there. The effect the umbrella has on guests essentially makes it so that they are given an invisible clear weather effect, meaning that it's as though it were sunny out for the purposes of them getting wet. You can think of it like an invisible timer which ticks down from the moment the guest gets the umbrella out, down to when they are finally considered by the game to be dry. Additionally, if it is raining and guests are dry, they will keep their umbrellas up until it is no longer raining, meaning they won't get wet again unless they attend an attraction which will reapply wet status. If you notice it's starting to sprinkle in your game, take note of the weather patterns and the forecast in the bottom right corner. It'll tell you what you should look out for and how soon the danger of unhappy guests across your park is going to be. One more thing before we move on from water is the uncovered ride element. Guests who ride uncovered attractions when it is raining will be affected by the wet or soaked statuses as though they were out without an umbrella, even if they possess one. This is largely because, as you might assume, you can't use umbrellas on rides. Take care to add body dryers near the exits of these rides if they are long, and this is especially the case if your map is consistently raining on your parade. What happens if the opposite is true though? You might have noticed that without sufficient shade in a park, the Plankonians will get sunburned. This is not a status that goes away, and it causes guests to be uncomfortable in a way they cannot recover from. This means that groups of guests which get sunburnt can only really tolerate one or two more attractions before leaving the park. And this is a huge deal. There are a few ways to mitigate this. The first is to just have more trees and other objects which block the sun near paths. The second is that guest services building mentioned earlier. Ensure you have enough of these placed around so that every group in your park possesses sunscreen. You can completely ignore this though if your park is entirely underground, which I have done before and don't really recommend for the sake of your sanity. That's the high level of how weather impacts your guests. Do you have any questions, or would you like an in-depth look at the numbers behind the systems? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and have a lovely day.